appropriately to those concerns. And again, what we're seeing, similar to the Childline contacts that we had during this period of lockdown, there's been increases again. So things around adults, mostly around adult behaviour, but kind of looking at kind of increases in neglect, kind of poor adult behaviour, emotional abuse. They're all increases that we've seen within the helpline responses. And I think for us, none of us are shocked by any of these kind of figures. One of the interesting ones, though, there's been a decrease in sexual abuse. And for me, kind of thinking about, is that because young people didn't have the opportunity to talk to adults around kind of experiencing sexual abuse, because that tends to be something that's hidden quite often within the home. And maybe if there's no other adults like school services or voluntary sector or sports people seeing young people, recognising signs, or young people raising concerns directly to them, there's been a slight decrease in those figures. So I think nationally it reflects a picture which none of us, which we would all expect to see, that there's been increases in concerns directly to helpline services, but also from young people around topic areas that we have kind of anticipated over the last 6 months.
So from a local authority context, COVID-19 was a very bizarre situation. Suddenly we had invisibility of all of our vulnerable residents and families, all the processes and the procedures set up to keep us being able to have contact with families, to see them regularly through our libraries, through children's centres, through various different statutory services, such as social care, for example. All of a sudden, these people were no longer visible to us. So how could we reach out and make sure that they were safe? And effectively, all our efforts, as you'll all be aware, shifted to focus on ensuring that families had access to food and shelter. The biggest issues at the beginning of lockdown were not necessarily rooted in named factors or issues that we might consider as part of safeguarding. It was the general being able to survive through an unprecedented global pandemic, of understanding the fears and anxieties that families were feeling, the fears and anxieties that professionals were feeling, and trying to find this space where we could move forwards. Lisa touched on domestic abuse calls. From a local authority perspective, that stalled initially. All of a sudden, people were trapped at home with their abusers, potentially. We had people like Victoria Derbyshire, a famous newsreader, putting the number for the domestic abuse helpline on her hand. We had a huge campaign, national campaign around domestic abuse. So for the first 3 to 4 weeks, we saw this kind of stopgap of not being able to see these families, not being able to connect with people who needed support. And then all of a sudden, a real flurry of people coming forwards. And this was parents, but it was also family members, it was neighbours, it was all different people reaching out and saying, actually, we're worried about this child, we need to keep them safe. What we found was that not all calls were reaching the threshold for social services, and particularly because of the big campaigns, we were seeing people coming forwards earlier in their experiences or not necessarily at such a high risk. And particularly we saw, alongside people reaching out for support around domestic abuse in terms of being survivors of it, we were also seeing people who were using abusive behaviours coming forwards and asking for support in order to change. I'm not sure if people are aware of Operation Encompass, but it's a really exciting piece of work around data sharing between police and schools where there's domestic abuse cases. And of course, with the COVID context, we had children at home with their families, and therefore Operation Encompass referrals zoomed high. As many services stopped delivering face-to-face, some closed due to furlough, local authority services had to completely shift, and you could argue that sometimes they're a little bit behind the times in relation to other areas. We were particularly lucky in Barking and Dagenham because we had such a shift towards different ways of working previously, but even so, it was a challenge nonetheless. What really came through at the very beginning of COVID and all the way through right up till now was this power of the community and voluntary sector, because the people that were suddenly invisible to local authority and statutory services were not invisible to people who were from the faith sectors, from the sports sector, from community groups, from those spaces that come together and just hold space for residents and citizens to be able to look after each other. And that's kind of what leads us on to some of the discussions around hope. So I think I'm going to quickly talk through something around adversity, and then we'll have a think about a case study. It was quite hard to figure out what we would put on as part of this conversation around how to understand adversity with children. And so we thought we would run through the ACEs study. So some people may already be quite familiar with it. Others might not have heard about it. So this is a whistle-stop tour, and there's a link at the end just in case. So ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences study, was a study from the 90s. So it's not super new, but combined with various advances in neuroscience understandings, we've got a much better understanding of it. It was a retroactive study. It was picked up in the US by an obesity clinic who rather serendipitously asked the wrong question of someone. They asked someone, I can't remember the exact wording, but it was along the lines of, how much did you weigh when you first had sex? And they answered it was 40 pounds, and they realised there was a child sexual abuse situation. So the doctor in charge, Dr. Filiti, at the Kaiser Permanente Centre, he came away and he thought, right, I'll go and get some funding. He did a massive retroactive study of adults. Over 17,000 adults were surveyed and asked about the types of adversity that they might have experienced in childhood. The 3 types of ACEs are up on your screen. So you've got abuse, so that's direct abuse, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse directly to the child, when obviously this is being asked of an adult about the experiences when they were children. Neglect from within the home, so physical and emotional neglect, and then household dysfunction. When we talk about household dysfunction, we've got a slightly wider understanding of it now, but within the original study, we're talking about mental illness, incarcerated relatives, the mother treated violently, substance abuse, and divorce. And I think the language around that can sometimes be quite stigmatizing and needs a little bit of unpicking, but it gives you the idea of these are traumatic events in the history of the adults that were talking from their childhood. Now, what did it tell us? It told us that as the number of adverse childhood experiences went up, so does the risk of negative outcomes in adulthood. Now, I'm going to touch on determinism because there is a little bit of determinism that comes through this, and we need to be really aware that this is correlative and not causative. But the study findings repeatedly revealed a graded dose-response relationship. So adverse childhood experiences are really common. So there's some statistics on the screen, but more recently, Public Health England studies suggest that nearly half of people in England have experienced at least one adverse childhood experience, and 1 in 10 have experienced 4 or more. So this is common. It's affecting a lot of our children, and it's affecting a lot of our families. People with high ACE scores were more likely to be violent or experience violence within the original study, to have more broken bones, more drug prescriptions, more autoimmune diseases, and more work absences. So that sounds pretty poor when you start to look at it. But what's really important, and when I first started learning about this, someone referred to it as the triangle of doom, and it's never come away from me. I've always remembered it as such now. This idea that adverse childhood experiences, adversity in childhood, would lead on to social, emotional, and cognitive impairments, which Lisa will pick up on in a bit. And this would potentially lead on to the adoption of what was referred to as health-harming behaviours. And again, that's quite stigmatising language. But ultimately, this idea that people would take up things like smoking, alcohol use, potentially unprotected sex, become victims or perpetrators of violence, etc., would lead on to disease, disability, and social problems, and effectively early death. But it's not fatalistic. It's not deterministic. At no point is it too late to support strong brain development when we're talking about children and young people, or when we're talking about adults, or if we might be thinking about recovery. But it does give us some kind of looks into some of the likelihoods that came through this study. So in terms of the correlations, so you can see some of those on the screen at the moment. People who had a lot of adversity in their childhood, 4 or more ACEs, in comparison to those who had none, were 4 times more likely to be a high-risk drinker, 6 times more likely to have had or caused unintended teenage pregnancies, and so on, that you can see there. So, oh, if this is the wrong one, we decided we were going to do Joe. I think Tony's...
Yeah, I think we'll just move straight on. That's okay.
Okay.
That's fine. Good job, because we're kind of probably going to be running out of time given my IT problems. So, Hazel's going to help with the IT side of these things, of the technical, whizzy stuff going on in on the allowing you to participate. But we've got a bit of a case study here about Joe, so I'm just going to read it out. And so Joe's 15, lives in London, and goes to this brilliant boxing club that is organised by its local residents association. The volunteers started the group because they were worried about the crime and gang activity on the estate. Life at home is really crap. My dad's got arrested and is doing time in prison for beating somebody up. This made Mum depressed, and she has started to drink a lot. It's quieter at home now that Dad's in prison, and there is no more arguing and fighting, but I do miss him, and I know Mum does. I have been going to boxing session more since Dad went inside. It's helped me with some positive things to focus on, get me out the house. It gets me down, seeing my mum so upset and even drunk. The coaches are always positive. They help me to understand the importance of discipline, to only use my fist when I'm in the ring. We have a person that come in to talk to us the other day about healthy food and looking after our bodies by not taking drugs or steroids or drinking. I like my coach. He's on the level. I told him about my dad and he listened to me. It helped me to know that there's somebody who had my back and I can go to if I need to vent. He asked me if I wanted to help out with the younger kids, but he's as his assistant, and work towards getting my level 1 assistant coaching award. It made me feel really proud of myself that someone believed in me and sees my potential. So just kind of a bit of a case study from Joe, from how a young person is viewing their world around them. And Hazel's going to kindly do this whizzy thing with this amazing, what's it called, mural?
A mural. So what we're going to do, I'm going to pop a link into the chat. Now, if you have any problems or if we have any issues with people being able to access it, then let us know in the chat and we'll find another workaround by using the chat. But if you use it, it's also something you might use if you're working in the community. There's, particularly as we're finding our ways working online, it's a really simple way, and I'm going to keep my screen shared because what we'll do is make it so that anyone who can't access it will be able to see what we're looking at. So if you follow the link, this is what you should have on your screen, and we'll be able to use these post-it notes. Can someone pop in the chat whether or not they've gained access to it? I can see people popping up, so I can see that people are getting into it. It gives you little names and numbers, so we've got people popping through. So do you want to talk through it, or do you want me to talk through it, Lisa?
So if you talk how this works, but I think we're going to try and replicate what we would do in a face-to-face environment, where we would want to be looking at what are the potential concerns, what are the suspected safeguarding issues for the individual, for the environment, the family. Think about what potential harm there might be to Joe, and then think about what responses is required and what we need to consider, what considerations we need to make. So I can see things flying all around the place here, Hazel, which is quite exciting. But you need to talk through the IT side of things.
So absolutely. If you click onto a post-it note, you'll notice that you can start writing on it. So in the top left corner, I'm doing a little test here, and you can add in what you think you would put on to a post-it note if we were face-to-face. So what we're asking, what's the nature of the potential or suspected safeguarding concern? We've got it split into environmental, individual and family concerns, and what we think the potential harm might be. And then after we've done that, we need to have a think about what response might be required and what considerations need to be made. What do we need to think about around this? So if I give you an example, an environmental concern might be growing up in a deprived community. or it might be an environment with little economic opportunities, for example, an inner city council estate. There might be lots of different things that we could put in that space. A family might be, we've got an absent parent at the moment. So start writing in there. You should be able to type away. I can see someone started writing in potential harm already. Oh, just jumped away from it. So
I can't even see the chat on here. Are people able to do this, Hazel?
So I can see that people are in it. So if someone starts writing for me so that I can see, you can zoom in and zoom out.
So we've got something in the family one there.
So violence in the family, absolutely. That's visiting lion. But there's no wrong answers and it's anonymous. So fill in as much as you want. What we'll do is maybe read through the, what's his name again?
Joe.
Through Joe's story again so that you can capture it.
Yeah, so any ideas about what you think might be the harm to Joe? Whether you think it's kind of on an individual basis, thinking about the kind of environmental factors that might be contributing to any potential safeguarding concerns or any harm. So let's just kind of think about what might be impacting on Joe.
And if anyone is having any issues, then chuck it in the chat and we'll pick it up there and I'll slot it over. So his age, definitely.
Mother's alcohol use, yes, brilliant.
Oh, that's a really interesting one.
I can't see, what was that one?
Poor lighting on the route home from school.
Yeah,
that's a real sexual safeguarding issue.
Yeah. Any other environmental factors that were mentioned in the scenario? So Hazel just raised contextual safeguarding. Is there anything else that sprang to people's minds? I mean, this is blowing my mind here, Hazel, that we can have all of these post-it notes flying around on a screen.
So let's maybe target that towards potential harm, because I'm not entirely sure if I've got a lag. So I can see some things being written and then it seems to be catching up with itself. So in terms of potential harm for Joe, his dad's not in the home at the moment. His mum's drinking. There's various different things happening. There's clearly some support that he needs. He's really connecting with his boxing coach. What's the potential harm at home for him?
Is that visiting lion again? What's that one? Low motivation for school. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think that he would be, kind of feeling, with his kind of what's going on at home, loss of opportunities. Absolutely. What have we got there? Lack of support in managing routines, domestic abuse. So yeah, definitely in terms of kind of the trauma he's already experienced, that domestic abuse is definitely there. Managing the kind of lack of routine. So if dad's not there, so we've got one less parent, we've got a mum who's absent because she's using substances. So that's kind of that routine might be gone for him. We've got neglect. Yeah, mum might not be in, in an emotional position herself to be able to kind of making kind of having a routine around meals and family time. What else have we got coming up? I feel like I'm Mr. Magoo now. I'm like that staring at the screen. What's that one? Vulnerable due to high threshold of abuse. Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of thinking about the community and the environment that Joe's growing up in. So it was set up by volunteers because they were worried about kind of gang activity on the estate as well. So I think that he might be at risk of that as well, from a contextual safeguarding point of view. We've got grooming in there. So yeah, so absolutely, you know, we kind of think that the coach might be a really good person, and you know, might be definitely positive about kind of the interactions with Joe, but we need to kind of think the unthinkable and think about whether somebody potentially could be grooming someone. So we need to make sure that the proper safeguards are in place there for Joe and for the coach as well.
So shall we move across to what our response is? What do we think we should be doing? What do we need to think about?
So yeah, if you were involved with Joe and you were kind of working with him and his family, what type of things do you think you might need to be considerate of, and what responses might we need to have? Is everybody an animal? I've got elephants and cats and lions flying around the place. What have we got there? I can't see that one.
Owls and lobsters. So I can see people who are on here. Don't worry about putting anything if it's potentially, there's no wrong answers. It's very much about, we could fill this with all sorts of different things that we could be considering. So just get them out, as many as you can think of. Mentoring.
Yeah.
So this is something from a local authority perspective we're really interested in, because it has the potential to be so effective for young people in particular. And so we're really tying that into our trauma responses and trying to look at that from the perspective of recovery from adversity.
And we've got loads of things flying in now, Hazel. Can you zoom in a little tiny bit? I can't see very well. And I don't clearly whether it's time to wear glasses. So ensuring the boxing coaches trained on how to report safeguarding issues, absolutely. If that's one of the main people in Joe's life, it's really important that the coach has an understanding of their safeguarding responsibilities to pass on any concerns that they've got to statutory agencies. We've got risk assessment and safety planning for when the mum drinks. Absolutely, somebody there that maybe use signs of safety model there, which is brilliant. So that might be something that children's services intervene on, where they would help the family to kind of think about a safety plan about what Joe could do and what mum could do, to make sure that Joe was safe if she felt that she needed to kind of use substance or use alcohol in that particular point of view, and where Joe can go to for support, maybe from people either in his family or in the wider community. So I think that's brilliant. Leadership training, I think that would be brilliant for Joe to be able to do that, and the mentoring we've already talked about, and we're going to be talking about that in a little while. And yet the family, extended family, so clearly people have been doing signs of safety model where you're looking at enhancing the role of the family, because they know each other better, and they're able to provide that informal support when children's services or voluntary sector maybe are not working, you know, either on a weekend. Usually there tend to be flashpoints, weekends or evening, and they will be there to be able to help and support Joe and his mum. So brilliant. What else have we got coming up? Ensure that the setting that can provide subsidy support, like free meals. Definitely that kind of free meal intervention from schools is really important, and we've seen that from Marcus Rashford during lockdown, that it was really challenging for lots of families when they weren't able to access those free school meals. So that's a really important aspect. And organisations thinking about like street games, and they help and support families with not only physical activity but through food as well during those sessions. So that's really important. Trauma informed coaching, wow, that's amazing. I'm going to be talking a little bit later on around I Coach Kids. We've got loads of resources around kind of child-centred. But yeah, as an organisation, the NSPCC is a trauma-informed organisation. And for us, it's really important that people have that understanding around how trauma does impact and affect children and what we can do as professionals helping and supporting them. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as we move through.
So
that's a fabulous little piece of resource, that is, Hazel. I love it.
So if anyone who's present wants to use it, it's mural.co. It's only recently found it. It's awesome. So do log on and see if you can use it yourselves.
Perfect.
And back to the slides.
Yeah, so what we would like to see for children is that not that they survive, and we would want them to be thriving as little individuals. And what we, kind of the last one of the last bullet points there, or post-it notes, was around trauma informed. And for us in the NSPCC, we feel it's really important that people have an understanding around brain development and how our interactions or adult behaviour can impact on children and young people and cause trauma, and that might be through adverse situations. But for us to kind of think about that, we need to be thinking about what happens earlier on in a relationship between children and main caregivers, so that 0 to 5 years of age. And what we need to do is we need to make sure that children have responsive adults around them who can help and support them with interactions and understanding the world around them. So that might be around kind of thinking about children starting to babble, pointing, kind of making gestures, facial expressions, all of those things. Adults then need to kind of give that back. So there's children giving us a clue to interact with them, a bit of a cue saying, hey, let's engage, let's communicate. We're social animals, human beings, and we need to make sure that we're supporting those children with that kind of interactions. And for us as adults, what we need to be doing is kind of serve and return. We need to give it back to children. So if children kind of start making some noises, we need to reciprocate that and making sure that we're listening to the cues that children are giving us and interacting with them. So if we don't do that and we're not engaging with children on that very basic communication level, they're not going to give it back to us. So we won't have that serve and return situation. So as we can see there on the screen, to reach out and serve to us again. And I always think about that serve and return type of relationship, those responsive carers, is having two glasses. So we've got a full glass of water and an empty glass of water. So we pour water into the empty glass of water. A child has water to pour back into us. And if we keep doing this pouring backwards and forwards to each other, it's a reciprocal relationship, and it's that serve and return relationship with children. But what happens if that's interrupted? And that can cause kind of issues for children in terms of them not having being able to regulate their emotions, their stress levels when things go wrong for them. But from our perspective, we're thinking about kind of older children maybe engaging in sport and physical activity. It's not too late when we get to adolescence, and there's a reset mechanism that happens within the brain, and children and young people are able to again have that reciprocal relationship with a responsive adult. And what they can do is try and help that child to regulate their emotions, maybe share attention with other people, learn about friendships, and be motivated within a learning environment. So it's really important that we're kind of aware of that early childhood situation, but also it happens in adolescence as well. So it's not too late when we get to adolescence for children to kind of repair the damage. So if people wanted more information on that, they can go on the NSPCC Learning website. So we just click over to the next slide. I think that's you now, Hazel.
So effectively, and I'm going to zoom through these because I know we've not got huge amounts of time. So actually, I'm wondering if it might be better to go straight to your slides next. But I will zoom through really quick. So when we were talking about this, we were talking about the hope in sport. So the hope in having physical activity, connection, access to peer groups, access to healthy adults around us, and how that can help when we're talking about children and young people and their experiences of the world. And we often look at the space of prevention. So we really, particularly from a local authority perspective, we're always talking about prevention, about stopping things happening in the first place. But there is also the space for response. So when something does go wrong, being that safety net that can catch young people, catch children, and make sure that they have access to support to get them back on track. Then there's recovery. So what Lisa has touched on around rebuilding and recovering from any adversity that a young person has experienced, and then proactivity, so that holistic response. So recognizing that sometimes it's not about a strict service provision, sometimes it is about creating a space for that person to have a human connection with someone that they trust and they believe in and believes in them. So I'm going to zoom through those because we'll pick up on this one maybe. So just in terms of from a local authority perspective, the response element, we just wanted to pick up on a few different bits that are quite useful to know about. So obviously we need to be very aware of statutory referrals, so how we need to do our safeguarding concerns and alerts, etc. We need to be aware of our local area designated officer if we've got any concerns about someone who might be a risk to children or vulnerable people. There's a video here we're not going to play because we're terrified it will go wrong. But ultimately, I just wanted to pick up on the fact that in many areas, local authorities will have an early help and intervention offer, and connecting in with them and getting to know them is really, really useful. But ultimately, if you're worried about a child, the NSPCC can act and you can report a concern through them as well. Sorry, I'm plugging you, Lisa.
That's great. I love it. We always like a good plug.
I just wanted to let you ladies know that we have till 5 o'clock. So if there are some bits that you want to cover, please do so.
Okay, no
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Liz.
So in terms of sharing the load, so for us, it's really important. So it's that kind of old proverb about it takes a village to raise a child. And for us, thinking about it within the sporting sector, how can we share the load take some of the load off parents and help them if they're maybe struggling with a kind of breakdown in care? And it might be a temporary breakdown in care. It might be thinking about COVID and how people are stressed because they might be facing redundancies. It might be that as we talked about before, kind of increased domestic violence because people are not able to get out of the house. So it might only be a temporary situation for some families. But what can we do in the sports sector? For us, it is about that hope. It's not that fatalistic perspective when we talk about childhood trauma and adversities. And what we can do is, as sports professionals, we can be that positive role model for young people. And what we can do is replicate that serve and return relationship on a weekly, thinking about kind of my experiences of playing sport. I was playing sport 4 times a week, and I'm sure there's lots of young people that are actively participating in sport quite frequently. So we can be that stable person in that child's life to make sure that we're providing that responsive, positive role model for those children. And what we can do is help them regulate their own behaviours as well. But we can also, by providing our sport and leisure opportunities, take that burden off parents for a short period of time and providing a bit of respite for them where they can maybe focus in on some of their own concerns and not think about their care and responsibilities for a short period of time, and hopefully get their own stress levels back to a normal kind of level. So just moving on to the next slide, please, Hazel. So what we need to be thinking about is the kind of tipping that scale and how important we are as a sports sector to be able to move children from that kind of stressful environment and move them into kind of tipping that scale positively to make sure that they're surrounded by positive adults in their lives. And on the right hand side here, I've got a diagram that's taken from iCoach Kids. So if people haven't looked at iCoach Kids, I would definitely recommend it. They've got loads of free resources on there that you're able to access. Some of the really positive things for me around child-centered coaching and thinking about how we keep the child at the center of our coaching and the way that we interact with them. But from a sporting perspective, how does physical activity help with children who have experienced trauma and experienced adversity? And the first bit is, as we've already talked about, is that supportive, responsive relationships. And what we can do is help children to explore the world around them and to make sure that they're learning those kind of positive messages that we get from sports. So that kind of taking turns, being respectful, being empathetic, kind of learning the rules of the games. They're all of those things that we get from that supportive, responsive relationship in a sport and physical activity setting. But then thinking about the actual physical element of participating in sport, there's a really positive thing about sport and stress, as probably most of you know, that the actual activity of doing it helps to get rid of the negative stress hormones and chemicals that fly around our bodies when we're stressed. So it might be that we've got inflammation, it might be that we've kind of got elevated in adrenaline, and that physical movement will help reduce that and that kind of that toxicity, that chemical toxicity within the body. But it will also help children in terms of developing gross motor skills and all of those other things that we talked about before around kind of learning the rules of the games and those social cues or those social norms that we have within society that are working within the boundaries of the game, but also being able to kind of work up to that level and understand how we would navigate around those rules of the games. And the last one on there is about reducing sources of stress. So kind of it's about kind of kind of reducing those levels of stress and reducing inflammation and developing good coping mechanisms as well. So just moving on to the next one, please, Hazel. So what else can sport do? So first and foremost, we provide after school activities or activities in school on the weekends. And that's really important for young people to feel a sense of pride and sense of enjoyment. If you listen to children when we talk about sport, it's all about that it makes them happy, it's fun. And for me, that's that positive thing about sport, and we need to kind of maintain that for them. And that's so important for children, that they just have an opportunity to kind of forget about their worries and have fun and engage with their friends and friends in those activities. We've already talked about kind of having those safe, stable, nurturing relationships, that serve and return relationship with the people that we're engaging with. And Hazel mentioned before about kind of mentorships, and it might be that there's a formal mentorship that we have within within an arrangement, whether it be through local authorities or through other different sectors. But for me, kind of thinking about coaches, they could be an informal mentor. So like Joe, the coach there, could be that mentor for Joe, kind of modelling as the head coach of a basketball club or a rugby club, and showing Joe about kind of that positive attitude and being a positive role model, and for them to develop that assistant coaching. So informally, that isn't like a mentor for that individual. But the fourth one is about intervening to lessen the harms and prevent future risk. So for me, if I think about sport and physical activity, we're the third biggest sector in children's lives. So they're at home, they're at school, and the next biggest sector is sport and leisure. So a really important aspect of being able to safeguard children. And what we can do is if we notice that there's something not quite right, a child's maybe displaying behaviours that they haven't before, or you're really worried, they say something, that is when we can intervene. And it's not that we're kind of telling on anybody. Actually, what we're doing is we're protecting children and we're safeguarding children. And that should be our first and foremost priority, is making sure that they're at the centre of all our decision making processes. And I appreciate that we still have to have relationships with parents, but our focus should definitely be around it being child centred and making sure that we're looking after the welfare of those children. And thinking about kind of some of the work that active partnerships that I work work with in the Northwest and in the Midlands, some of the things that they tell me that they're doing is that they're helping parents manage their own stress by doing things like yoga classes and mindfulness. And for me, that kind of then helps parents to be able to deal with their own stresses so that they can get back on track for their caring responsibilities of their children. And ultimately what we want to do is to have children to reach their full potential, and all of those things there, sport has a really important role to play within that. And just like to point out there around kind of ACEs connections as well. So if people wanted more information around kind of what we can do as communities, if you go on the ACEs connections, and that's part of CDC, there's loads of information on there as well that will help you moving forward. So the next one. So if people have got any concerns that has been raised with today, you know, around a child that they might be working with, they can phone the NSPCC helpline. You can give your contact details, or you can make an anonymous referral as well, because sometimes people don't feel like they're in a position to be able to kind of share their kind of contact details moving forward. So that information's out there. As the screen showed before, NSPCC, the helpline email address is 24 hours, but we're open till I think it's 9 or 10 o'clock, and then 8 till 10, and then on the weekends we're open till 6 o'clock as well. So you're more than welcome to make a referral through to there, and if there is concerns that met the threshold for children's services, they would pass that information on to statutory agencies. If you're worried within your own organisation of something that's happening there, you can contact the whistleblowing helpline as well. So NSPCC is a partner organisation that's been accredited by the government. So we have the capacity to be able to take those whistleblowing information as well. But we'd really like you to push the childline as well. We can see through the lockdown, and my home city of Liverpool's kind of gone back into lockdown. So we know that there's lots of concerns out there for young people who might not be able to kind of access other support networks out there. Push this out to them on your Twitter feeds and stuff, so that young people know that they've got somewhere to go to outside of their family network, and they can access that support either from accessing the web pages or the group chats, or actually speaking individually with a counsellor as well. So the next slide, please, Hazel. So some of the things from the NSPCC perspective, people can access some of the videos on YouTube. So if you just put in NSPCC, there'll be a whole load of different videos that people can watch. The tipping of the scale, childhood trauma and brain development are the new videos that we've got out there. But also people can access the Learning NSPCC website as well. And there's tons of information out there around kind of all the stuff around brain development, but on lots of different safeguarding concerns as well. And that's all free to be able to access. There's loads of templates, toolkits that people are able to use as well. Hazel, are you going to do the domestic abuse? Yeah.
I just wanted to add, so I think I'm sharing the old set of slides. There is actually a massive list of those, so I'll make sure that Shaz has got the updated version, because if you look on London Sports website, they've got a huge amount as well. So there are resources out there for families where there is domestic abuse. There is resources out there when children might be thinking about drugs and want to learn about drugs and substance misuse. There is resources out there for all different things, particularly mental health. So like Kooth is a really amazing app, for example. There is so much out there that sometimes it can be a little bit daunting when you've got someone in front of you that might need something, but you're not entirely sure what it is. So that's definitely where the NSPCC comes in. But if you've got a clear, actually, this family could really do with a bit of help, there is so much resource out there, and I would definitely have a look on the NSPCC website, London Sport website. I've also, on the updated version, which I'll give Shaz so that it's easily shared, is the London Safeguarding Board's website. So where you want to get to know your local authority and you want to get to know the local area designated officer, or otherwise known as the LADO, I would definitely recommend it. We're generally a friendly bunch, so it's definitely worth getting to know the local authority leads, whether that's the social care leads or your community safety leads, who are equally as interested in keeping children at the heart of everything we do. Did you want to share the thing? This is...
Yeah, so I love this quote from Nelson Mandela, and for me, kind of, sport has the power to change the world. It has the power to inspire in a way that little else does. It speaks to the youth in a language they understand, and sport can create hope where there is despair. And that's the last bit there, is that kind of really strong message about sport. You know, we're working in lots of different communities. Some communities are really deprived, and there's lots of safeguarding concerns within that, either in a contextual safeguarding perspective or in the more traditional sides of things. So for us, we have such an important role to play for children and young people, and we need to be able to kind of make sure that young people see us as being a positive experiences, and that we're giving really positive opportunities for young people to participate within their chosen sport, which will hopefully give them hope to move forward and not be that fatalistic side of things around if they've experienced trauma or adversity within their life.
So I know Shaz said we've got until 5 o'clock, so if there is any questions, we can take them. It's very, very bizarre not seeing people's face. I know I've said that before, but knowing whether or not there is any serve and return, and people are still here.
Yeah, we had none, did we?
Thank you, ladies. Thank you so much for sharing that with us and taking the time to present that wealth of knowledge. There is a chat function. We've got that available here. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any questions that have come through onto that, nor has there been any on the Q&A. But I suspect that is because this is an area which a lot of people are fully aware of, but also the wealth of information that was given today. I think people do need some time to go back and reflect and look at all those slides and look at all those links. And I do want to say thank you so much for putting in so much effort to ensure that that is a comprehensive, comprehensive session on all of the resources out there, as well as thinking about trauma in a different way, thinking about the interaction and the real impact, the direct impact sport can have on that. So I do recommend that everybody has a look at the slides. I will ensure that we share the most updated version to everybody so they can have a look at it. And at London Sport, we're really happy to hear from you. So if down the line after this event is over for you, you've had some time to reflect and look at everything, please do get in touch with us, and we will ensure that it goes to the right person, whether that's Hazel or whether that's the appropriate person within the borough that you work with. So please do get in touch with us. We do have a couple more minutes for questions, but if none pop up, I'd like to really thank everybody for taking part. I'd like to thank all the participants for being patient and engaging in the session as well. We've put up on there the link so that you could take the survey and evaluate the session. I'd like to also invite everybody to join us at our next session, which is going to take place at the Huddle. It is a chance for you to have in-depth conversations in smaller groups. So sort of the networking mixer. If you were face-to-face, we'd probably maybe be doing it over a drink or a juice. But unfortunately, in these times, we're going to have to do it on our platform. But please do join us for that. And our last session for today is also going to be hearing from young people, and the session is called In Their Own Words. So I think we will wrap it up there. Once again, thank you again, Hazel and Lisa, so much. And I think that is it for today. So please do get in touch with us if you have any questions on your reflections.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Shaz.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
I'm going to be really, I have no idea where the out button is. It's such a